Right, so welcome everyone to today's little workshop. Could we please have a moment's silence to gather our thoughts, followed by the Serenity Prayer? God, grant me the serenity to accept the things I cannot change, the courage to change the things I can, and the wisdom to know the difference. So, before we get going in any great detail, does anyone have any questions based on last time? Just unmute yourself if you do. Okay. So, where we are, I'll share the screen so we can have a look at the book. Right, so the passage in question, we usually conclude the period of meditation with a prayer that we be shown all through the day what our next step is to be, that we be given whatever we need to take care of such problems. We ask especially for freedom from self-will and are careful to make no request for ourselves only. We may ask for ourselves, however, if others will be helped. We are careful never to pray for our own selfish ends. Many of us have wasted a lot of time doing that and it doesn't work. You can easily see why. So let's take that apart. We usually conclude the period of meditation with a prayer that we be shown all through the day what our next step is to be. So I'm painfully literal with this sort of thing. So the prayer is, God, please show me all through the day what my next step is to be. It doesn't need to be more elaborate. Someone the other day in another situation asked if there was a particularly powerful prayer that they could use to, but when they're about to write their step 4. And it's a perfectly valid question. So when they're about to do some writing and their step 4, is there a particularly powerful prayer? And people gave lots of good suggestions. My suggestion is this: God, please help me do my step 4. There we go. That's sufficient. I don't think God's going to be like, not worded in a sophisticated enough way for me. Go back to the drawing board, come back with something elaborate. I think keeping it really simple really helps. Because this is not conjuring. We're not performing magic spells here. So, with the program, I have no opinion on people, religious practice. Sometimes that can be very elaborate and whatever. But with the program, I keep it very simple. The other issue with very elaborate prayers when it comes to my actual relationship with God, as God being the one who's in charge, with me being the one who is carrying out God's will, is that when I get elaborate, when you ask someone something really simple, like pass me the salt, you just say pass me the salt, or turn the light off, or let the cat out. You just say it. I don't know about you, when I find myself having to ask something in a very elaborate way, there's something fishy going on. I'm trying to manipulate, I'm trying to soft pedal it. When I'm in my right mind, I just say it. And I try and do that with God. When I'm trying to get elaborate with God, it's because I don't trust that God is actually going to come through. So I've got to hustle or trick God into doing what I want God to do. So, God, please show me all through the day what our next step is to be. I tend to get shown what my next step is to be step by step. So I don't get the whole plan in one go. So I plan for the day in the morning, and I have an idea of all the things that need to get done. And then I just say, what's the next one? What's the next one? What's the next one? Someone, just before this meeting started, asked me about planning for the day. And I told her what I currently do. Have a plan for the day. In the morning, you get up, you ask God, what's the plan for the day? You write out your plan for the day. Now, if you're if you're alcoholic and not very well trained in this, or if you're an addict, your plan for the day will look like this. 10 o'clock, stare out of the window. 11 o'clock, make an onion sandwich. 12 o'clock, eat the onion sandwich. 1 o'clock, leave the plate in the kitchen, brackets, without washing it up. 2 o'clock, stare out of the window. 3 o'clock, more staring. 7 o'clock, go to a meeting and complain. So that's your addict's plan for the day. And I was like that when I came in. The Al-Anons plan for the day looks like a plan which would be enough for you and all of your 1,000 children put together. So, fine, have a plan for the day. Then as soon as you've written the plan, cross half of the things off it. If you don't get through all of those things, maybe let me just close the door properly. I'm just disturbing someone. Right. So if that doesn't work, the next day you cross half of the things off the list, and then you cross off half again. You're probably left with 3 things. And if you're very lucky, you might get those 3 done. And that's fine. I may have mentioned before, Tom W. says that there were old timers when he got sober who would share that they were feeling very proud of themselves because they'd managed to do the laundry and mow the lawn on the same day, and that they were therefore making progress. Don P. would say, the art of being an old-timer is the art of doing absolutely nothing and not giving yourself a hard time about it. That's a paraphrase. That we be given whatever we need to take care of such problems, and that can be in any form. It's a comprehensive request. It could be for guidance, it could be for resources, it could be for assistance, it could be for simply the strength to do it. We ask especially for freedom from self-will. So my perspective on that today is very simple. When I'm concerned with God's will, I'm concerned with my contribution to the situation. When I'm concerned with self-will, I'm concerned with outcomes. Self-will is easier to spot with addicts and alcoholics because it's more obviously selfish. With Anons, it can look like kindness and whatever, but it's actually self-will because it's all about outcomes for other people. So you've got to be paying attention to realise that it's self-will, but that's a really helpful test. Am I concerned with my contribution or am I concerned with outcomes? If I'm concerned with outcomes, it's self-will. And are careful to make no request for... there's one exception to that. There are bottom lines that have to be taken care of. So the kids have to be fed. You need to close the windows if the cat is in the room in case the cat falls out of the window. You know, there are certain things where you have to be 100% about the outcome. But almost nothing is like that when you're talking about fundamental well-being. or if you're setting a boundary, let's say a situation might be with someone in your life that is in active addiction, and you've told them, if you relapse, I don't want to be present for it, so I'm going to separate myself from you if you relapse. And that's an outcome. And when I make a threat like that, there's nothing wrong with threats. It's how and when they're used. And I sometimes with sponsees who are alcoholics or addicts, that's what I say, that after a certain point, if the person relapses again, I'm not going to have any more contact for a while. They're going to have to find another sponsor, and I don't want chit chat either. I'm going to need a break. So I'm concerned with outcomes, only in certain situations. Most of the time, I'm concerned with the input. And are careful to make no request for ourselves only. We may ask for ourselves, however, if others will be helped. And I think the best example of this really is the Step 7 prayer, where we're asking for defects of character to be relieved so that others will be helped. So you ask for your bad temper to be relieved so that you're more useful to your sponsee. Again, I think from an Al-Anon perspective, we need to be slightly careful with this, with help. I think probably more than one of us has offered or given help when it wasn't asked for, or wanted, or welcome. And Anne Lamott, Lamott, she's a very good writer. She says, don't get your help all over people. And help is the sunny side of control. So I would adjust this for those of us who have the habit of being excessively helpful. I want to fit myself to be helpful, but not force that help into other people's lives. So you offer it up, and if they want it, fine. If they don't, fine. But they're going to have to ask. A good example of that is a lot of people who grew up in an Al-Anon, in an anonic or alcoholic or addict household. I certainly did this, grew up playing mind games. And I don't mean in a malicious sense, although occasionally that too. But the task was this: I'm not going to tell you anything, you have to guess. And the same works the other way around. So sometimes my poor old mother would storm around the house like a weather system. And our job was to guess what we'd done wrong. And it was ever such a good game, because if you guessed and you got it wrong, it would get worse. So the stakes would gradually be increased. So you had to be really careful with the guesses. And I think the logic was, if you loved me, you'd know. So the fact you don't know what you've done wrong is just further evidence that you don't care and you don't love me. So what has this got to do with anything? It's to do with help. So when sponsees contact me, or people in recovery contact me, so I'm sure you've had this experience, where you get a text from someone, and it could be a short text. More often than not, it's a long text, or a long WhatsApp, or a long email, which just has lots and lots of statements. And there's no question in there. And you've got to guess from this presentation of a complex and messy situation. You've got to guess what the person's question is for you, what the problem is that they're trying to have solved, and what your role is
in solving it. And woe betide you if you get it wrong. If you come in on the wrong angle, you'll get told off. They'll tell you, well, I don't want to know about that. I want to, so you've done something wrong. So my policy, the reason I use WhatsApp for communications is that I can have, rather than text, is that I can have WhatsApp on my computer. And I have it up on one of, I've got several computer screens when I'm working, and I have it up there. And in my computer, I've got a list of standard responses, which I can just copy and paste. It just makes life a lot easier. And, when people realise they've got a standard response, they get upset. Like, why can't you tailor me a response? Why should I? Anyway, whatever. And one of the standard responses is, thank you for contacting me. If you would like input on the situation, please ask me a question. I don't respond to statements. And funnily enough, often people say, well, I don't have a question. I just wanted to share. Well, that's all right. You can share as often as you like. But it's about, this is an Al-Anon thing. I shouldn't do for other people what they can and should do for themselves. So if I'm having to work out what your question is and answer it, I'm doing your job as well as mine. And there was a situation many years ago. It was about 17, 18 years ago. I had a sponsee who was a little bit, this was in AA, who was a little bit aggressive. And he would phone up and present situations, and I would respond, and then he'd argue with me. And I stopped responding. I did respond. I just said, I used the Al-Anon responses of yes, no, really, wow, okay, and thanks. Yes, get the pen out for this one. Yes, no, really, wow, okay, thanks. So I'll give you some examples. I'm going to the supermarket today. Yes. I don't think I'm ever going to go to Al-Anon again. No. I'm going to take up Buddhism. Really? I've just set a boundary with my mother and I'm never going to speak to her again. Wow. I hate you. Okay. And, there are lots of situations where thanks is fine. The only problem with, I've just given you this list. You want to be careful who you give the list to. I had a sponsee who, a few years ago, who was about 14, 15 years sober. And he said, oh my God, you're using the Al-Anon list of responses on me, aren't you? And I said, yes. He said, that's really rude. I said, really? He said, you can do this forever, can't you? I said, yes. He said, I'm going to go now. I said, okay. So to offer help when it's asked for, so it's got to be asked for, and it's got to be appropriate. We're careful never to pray for our own selfish ends. That really speaks for itself. So there's this whole thing. It's become very popular in the recovery world of, I can't even remember what it's called now. Basically, you visualise all the good things you want to come into your life. And then somehow God will manifest those in your life if you visualise them carefully enough. I'm very suspicious of this. This sounds like telling God what God's will is for me and trying to make it happen. Many of us have wasted a lot of time doing that and it doesn't work. And it's the same with any self-will. Most of the time we don't get it anyway. It's like praying for people to get well. I've stopped doing that. If they're going to get well, they're going to get well with or without me praying hard, interceding on their behalf. So I don't pray for people to get well in a recovery sense. I'm not talking about the prayers for people's health as part of the, your standard daily prayers. I don't want to interfere with that. But in recovery, when I start praying for some particular person to get well, why aren't I praying for everyone? Why them? Why not everyone? If I'm going to pray for people to get well, how about I pray for everyone? That, to me, that's more legitimate. It's when the reason it's dangerous is not because it's a bad thing, but because it's a trap door through which my ego gets in, and I start to try and mentally impose my will on the universe. And you can tell you're doing that is you're disappointed when they relapse. Don Pritz would say that he's never surprised when people relapse. He's surprised when they don't. So I've made the decision to be surprised when people... Oh, yes, someone just said that it's the law of attraction. Yes, that's the thing that people talk about. So I've started to assume that people won't get well, and then I'm always pleasantly surprised when they do. Right, next paragraph. If circumstances warrant, we ask our wives or friends to join us in morning meditation. So, I have this little morning meditation group. You're all very welcome to join. We have an evening session as well where we are going through the big book. We're on step 5 at the moment. And I'm finding that very useful. I've never done it before this point. There's one before the lockdown. There was one day a week I would go and do yoga at 7:30 in the morning. The reason I find it useful is routine is useful. Gets me out of myself. Sometimes I'm not in the right state to pray or meditate in the morning. But after I've had the 20-minute morning meditation meeting, I'm always in a fit state to pray or meditate. I find it useful. Sometimes I can't come up with good stuff from within. It helps me to hear other people share. If we belong to a religious denomination which requires a definite morning devotion, we attend to that also. I mean, that speaks for itself. You'll know what that means. My experience with doing that, some days it's really helpful for me to race through as much of the material as possible because you know it very well and it triggers associations from all of the other times you've read the same prayer and it just immediately transports you to another space. Other times I go through only excerpts of the morning prayers so I can concentrate on particular prayers more closely or even on particular lines, and and this is not, that this has no supervisory seal of approval. This is just what I'm doing right now and have done for a while, is I do what my instinct tells me in terms of what's going to connect me most effectively to God in the moment. Sometimes it's racing through saying as many of the prayers as possible. Sometimes it's taking it really slowly. Some days my mind just isn't there. Some days it's there. If I take my body to the prayers, my mind eventually follows. And sometimes there are certain traditions where people get very upset if you just say prayers by rote every day. And they say, but where's the intention of that? Where's the... you're not really connecting to the higher power, you're just saying the words. And I understand the argument. And, this isn't the place for discussions about the relative merits of the positive act and the intention behind it. You know, which is more important? Is it the positive act or is it the intention behind it? If you have one but not the other, does it even count? There are philosophers that will talk about that, and so go and read them. But some experience on that is saying prayers by rote has an extraordinary effect. If you say them enough, they're buried inside your memory and they pop out at you at unexpected times when they're super needed. And so I'm a great fan of knowing these prayers off by heart, because they provide a vocabulary for the higher power to reach me. When I reach out to the higher power often reaches back through the words of a prayer which I've learnt off by heart and have said a lot of times, or simply have said the prayer again and again and again and again and again. The other benefit of having prayers which are hardwired into my mind is that I don't sleep brilliantly. I get off to sleep quite well, but I start to wake up around 4:30 in the morning. And usually I'm fine, but sometimes my mind is racing, and having the set prayers, they tend to start kicking in, and the prayers just repeat in my mind over and over and over, and I find it very calming. And the prayers, in any case, are better than the rubbish that my mind will come up with on its own. Someone just said it sounds like mantra work, and yes, it's a similar principle. I mean, if the danger of mantras is that if you pick the wrong one, they can be idolatrous. So pick something that's valid for your tradition. But although the mind can think of different things at the same time, it's very difficult to run two narratives in your mind at the same time. And so forcing your mind, well, forcing is the wrong word, gently and persistently and non-judgmentally. That's a good trio of words, by the way, gently, persistently and non-judgmentally. Gently, persistently and non-judgmentally channeling your mind along a particular track, at the very worst, stops it from going on along the track it shouldn't be going along. And one of the great benefits of practising step 11 over time is that you end up being the rider of the horse, sitting atop the horse and in control of the horse's movements. You control when the horse stops and starts, whether it goes left, whether it goes right, whether it goes slowly, whether it goes quickly. Most people, when they get to recovery, are like someone that is a horse rider, but they've fallen out of the saddle. Their foot is still stuck in the stirrup. The horse is galloping at 100 miles an hour, and they're being dragged behind the horse, still convinced that they're riding the horse, that they're in charge, and they're not. I wasn't. And I think the use of definite practices is very helpful in training my mind to obey the will and not having my will subservient to my mind. A very good author and writer on this is a rabbi called Zvi Freeman, Freeman. You can find him on the Chabad website. He's very good on regaining control of your mind, and it's not a quick study. I mean, it takes years, but the ability to choose what you think about when you think about it. What's next? If not members of religious bodies, we sometimes select and memorize a few set prayers which emphasize the principles we have been discussing. I think it's not bad when, I think most of us here probably do have set prayers that we use, or specific morning devotions, to always keep a lookout in those prayers for parallels between program literature and ideas and notions, and the ideas and notions present in those formal prayers. And I mean, the parallels are infinite. It's a waste of time to even start looking at where they are, because they're everywhere. They are just everywhere. I mean, a lot of writers write very well about Egypt as being the symbol of your addiction if you're an addict, or your frantic mental state if you're an untreated Anon. And I mean, just that single notion that Egypt is a symbol of your addiction or Anonism, I mean, you could dine out on that. Obviously, if you're going to dine out on that, it's with unleavened bread, not leavened bread. You can dine out on that for years. That single image of all of the stories and teachings about that and what that symbolizes. I mean, a good one that I give you an example of one that I heard a few months ago. About leaving Egypt is you don't want to hang around. You want to get out of there quickly. So travel light, don't look back. Keep it speedy. And that's my experience with doing the steps. If you do it too slowly, the revelations are buried amongst so much other clutter, mentally and circumstantially, that you don't notice it. It's possible to go through the steps and for it to have zero effect, because it's done so slowly that all of the effects are diluted, and you're no further ahead at the end of the process than you were at the beginning. So I'm currently saying with sponsees, I'll only do that if you're going to do it quickly. I'll do it with you, but I'm not going to do this slowly, because it just doesn't work. So to I think it's very important to connect the program and the spiritual practices of the program with whatever religion one is practicing. And now, what I'm about to say, you get bonus marks for, but they're not part of the curriculum. Okay, so this is for the honours students. Some people, and it depends on their what religious laws they're following, depends on their temperament, it depends on all sorts of things, are able to look at ideas, religious or spiritual ideas, from outside their tradition, to take what is compatible with their own tradition and use it. And I was listening to someone earlier today, a woman talking, who was born into a reform environment, but has spent most of her adult life in a Haredi environment. And she was talking about, she did transcendental meditation when she was in her teens, and it involved mantras and all sorts of, the whole thing. And she still does meditation. In fact, she teaches meditation, amongst many other things. She's a therapist, and she's a social worker, and a this, and a teacher, and that. She gives talks. She's very interesting. But she said, she talked to a couple of rabbis, and she removed from the practice any elements, either verbal or otherwise, which wouldn't fit in with her religion. But she was able to learn from aspects of the practice which are universal and which don't interfere with her religion. And I think there's a lot of sense in that. So I'm not a Christian, but I live in a majority Christian country, notionally, in any case. I mean, if you're not British, if you're in Israel or you grew up in America, you may be surprised to discover how irreligious the British are. There was a sketch on the television in the 1980s where a chap was dressed up as a Church of England priest giving an interview, and he was talking about, and it was a comedy sketch, and he was talking about the Church of England, and the interviewer says, well, what is the role of God in the Church of England? And the chap says, well, God is mentioned. And I think that's the role of God in British society generally. God is occasionally mentioned. Where was I going with this? Okay, so I'm in a lot of the material around me is Christian. And there's a 17th century French monk called Brother Lawrence, who was a grumpy man. Well, at least grumpy with other people. I think he was perfectly happy in himself. I think other people irritated him. I'm sure you can identify with that. He's like fine as long as there's no one else in the room. As soon as there's someone else in the room, just tense. And he was famous for having developed a very straightforward relationship with God, where he devoted each action to God. So if he picked up, he lived in a monastery, and his job for I don't know how many years was to make and mend sandals. And this was a bright man, but his job was to make and mend sandals. And so he dedicated each moment of the day to serving his higher power, or recognizing he is in the presence of his higher power. And actually, I'm just going to get a quotation. Just give me a moment. I have to unshare the big book screen and then I'll go back to it in a moment. So, okay, so I'm going to go and share this little passage now. Right, so it's the passage in blue. When an occasion of practising some virtue was offered, he addressed himself to God, saying, Lord, I cannot do this unless thou enablest me. In other words, unless you enable me to do it. And then he received strength more than sufficient. When he had failed in his duty, he only confessed his fault to God, saying, I shall never do otherwise if you leave me to myself. It is you who must hinder my falling and mend what is amiss. Then after this, he gave himself no further uneasiness about it. And now this is written by a Christian who was a monk, so he was no slouch. But I think you'll see there's nothing Jesus-y about this. It's about a direct relationship with God. There's nothing which stems from Christian doctrine in this, any doctrine specific to Christianity. And what I do with this, as I would with anything from any religion which someone points in my direction, say, how can I use this? So I say to God, and I'm putting this in my own language now, it's just an example of how to use something from a tradition which is not your own, without it interfering with your own doctrinal beliefs. So I've got to recognise God is the source of everything. If I have the power to do anything, the power comes from God. Does that sound familiar from your own religion? Then he received strength more than sufficient. I mean, what are the Tehillim about, other than, getting strength from God? The number of times the word strength is used in connection with God. When he had failed in his duty, he only confessed his fault to God. Think of part of your daily prayers where you have to confess what your faults are, or in the annual cycle when you confess what your faults are. I shall never do otherwise if you leave me to myself, the recognition that I can't pull myself up by my own bootstraps. I need God's help. It is you who must hinder my falling. So that's not very different from having angels sent to you to lift you up on their palms so you don't hit your foot against a stone. It's the same idea. And mend what is amiss. But this is the interesting bit. This is where it gets really interesting. Then, after this, he gave himself no further uneasiness about it. So it's a little throwaway line at the end. Now, everything before that, you might say to yourself, well, I can get that from my own tradition. Fine, it's all there. But it's the last line, it's the throwaway line which is interesting. How often have you, because I've done this, I make a mistake, I admit it to myself or to other people, maybe, and to God, either in step 11 or in step 5. I recognize that God is going to need to help me out here in step 6 and 7. And I resolve to go forward and get it right the next time. And then I spend the next 6 weeks feeling continuously guilty about what I've done, beating myself up, thinking very ill of myself, and feeling hopelessly this will never get fixed. And the antidote is in that last throwaway line. Then after this, he gave himself no further uneasiness about it. I find that helpful. And I can take passages like that. There are authors I can't read because they require me to believe all sorts of things I don't believe. But I'm open. It's just like when I go to a meeting. The religion comes off and I can listen to people from whatever background and use whatever people say. And sometimes I can use it directly, and sometimes I can translate it. And God will... I have very good taste, but God has very bad taste, if I dare say that. God will speak through anyone. God doesn't seem to care. God is not picky. I'm picky. I will want to pick the people that God speaks through. Whereas God seems to not distinguish between one person and another. When you're doing a census, everybody gets counted once and only once. The great and the good get counted once. And people who are terrible get counted once. So, God is valuing each person the same, apparently, if they're counted the same. And I think it's like that with... So when I'm in a meeting, I get to listen to everyone, and anyone can help me. I don't get to pick who's going to help me, which annoys me. I want the smart, sophisticated, interesting, funny people to help me. I don't want the people I don't like to say helpful things. That's not helpful. But it is. And that's what I try and learn over time. I'm going to go back to the big book. So, God doesn't really have bad taste, just for the record. There are many helpful books also, and we've really just covered that point. If something is, and the great rule that was given to me by a Jesuit friend of mine, Father Tom, who spends a lot of time in the Far East, in Laos and Cambodia and Vietnam, and sometimes China. And there's a Jesuit who learns from other traditions. Very interesting. If something helps, use it. If it doesn't help, don't use it. I'm going to repeat that. If something helps, use it. If it doesn't help, don't use it. If it doesn't help, stop trying. Just pick another book off the shelf. Don't force anything. Suggestions about these may be obtained from one's priest, minister, or rabbi. Be quick to see where religious people are right. Make use of what they offer. And this is really the same point again. I will accept help from wherever it comes. As we go through the day, we pause when agitated or doubtful and pray for the right thought or action. Now this is really a summary of what it has on pages 84 and 85 in step 10. It's a reiteration of the principles of step 10 but buried in step 11. So it's saying the same thing in a different way. Now, agitated or doubtful, that sounds like a very specific pair of words, but I think it's universal. I only have two types of problem. Type of problem number one is I'm upset emotionally. I'm not poised, I'm not balanced, I'm not calm. Option number two is that I don't know what to do. That's the second type of problem. There is no problem I've ever had which is not one or the other. Agitation, so I'm upset. Give me a moment. So I'm upset or doubtful, I don't know what to do. So, whenever we have a problem, it's going to fall into one of those two categories. What is the answer? Well, this is the interesting thing. It's the same for both. The right thought or action the only things I can change my beliefs, attitudes and thoughts on one hand and my action, including speech, on another. So that's the only level at which the correction that concerns me can take place. We constantly remind ourselves, constantly means all the time, remind ourselves that we are no longer running the show. You can only remind yourself of something you've forgotten. So I think this recognises that I'm going to forget the whole time and believe that I'm running the show. And this is because of the optical illusion. Wherever you are and you look around you, you're the centre. It's very easy to think that you're the centre of the universe. Humbly saying to ourselves many times each day, thy will be done. You could practice this for 5 years and never get it perfect. We're then in much less danger of excitement, fear, anger, worry, self-pity, or foolish decisions. Let's cover those. Now, worry is a form of fear. All of these things are about getting our own way. So fear, I'm not going to get my own way. Worry, I'm not going to get my own way. Anger, I haven't got my own way. Self-pity, I haven't got my own way. Excitement, I'm getting my own way. Or foolish decisions, how can I get my own way? I know, I've just had an idea. By the way, here's a point about ideas. If it's after 9 o'clock at night and it seems like a good idea, it isn't. Just make a little note of that one. So all of these are about self. And we've got 6 examples. Note that excitement is as dangerous as the other ones. Because excitement is about positive attachment and the others are about negative attachment. A friend of mine got very excited about a new friendship. And then the friendship went in a different direction and he got very upset. He got as upset as he had been excited. So I want to watch excitement. I'm usually setting myself up for an equal and opposite reaction. What goes up must come down. There's a term, brick drop. It's in films where someone says a particular line in the early part of the film, and then it comes back later on in the film and turns out to have an amazing significance in a new context. And that's called a brick drop. If you watch Disney or Pixar films, they are full of them. Look for ideas or words or notions which are throwaway words or ideas or notions at the beginning, and listen out for them coming back throughout the rest of the film. Brick drop. Excitement is usually a setup for a brick drop and not a good one. So when I find myself in very deep fear or anger or worry or self-pity, there's very often been a period of excitement before, which has set me up for subsequent disappointment. We become much more efficient. We do not tire so easily, for we are not burning up energy foolishly as we did when we were trying to arrange life to suit ourselves. So that's pretty straightforward. Obviously, being upset is very tiring. You'll have a hangover the next day. Similarly, if you're running everything, you're going to get tired. If you can't delegate, you're going to get tired. By the way, delegation doesn't just mean delegating things to people who are as perfect as you. If you're waiting for people who are as perfect as you to delegate things to, you're going to be waiting a while. So delegation means giving other people stuff to do. You just know it won't be done as well as if you did it, but life is too short. Just let them do it. And eventually they get good at it, and sometimes they get better at it than you were. But they only get there if you delegate it enough, and then eventually people learn. I'm being a little bit facetious here, but you get the point. So running the world, very tiring. Being upset, very tiring. There is a phrase that people use sometimes, I haven't got the time. Someone once pointed out to me, she said, sweetheart, you get the same 24 hours that I do. And she was right. We talked a lot in other sessions about time management. But what I would add here is it's not just what activities I pack into the day. It's how efficiently I'm doing them. The Concepts essays by Bill W. talk about two ideals. The first ideal is to be effective. You want to get the job done well. The second objective is to be efficient, which means you don't waste resources. And this is very important. You could scrub the kitchen floor so that it's perfect and take 5 hours over it, but the rest of the house is a tip. This is effective but not efficient. Efficiency means accepting that things will only ever be 60% up to your standard. And that's fine. And learning to live with that. But there's got to be a balance between the two. So something which is super effective but really inefficient ends up being ineffective. So a step 5, which takes a year, this happens, where someone goes round to the sponsor's house every Sunday for a year, and it takes a year to get through it. It's the heaviest experience. I mean, it's wonderful in some ways. There's lots of detail which is gotten through. But you're missing something. You're missing the impact of having everything summarised in one go and getting this release from realising your whole problem can be summarised in 1 hour or half an hour or even 10 to 15 minutes. So effectiveness and efficiency, I would add it's possible to be effective and efficient, but everyone hates you because you're not exactly harmonious. So you want to aim, I believe, this is what I try and do, after getting this wrong for many years, is to be effective, efficient and harmonious. Where does harmonious come from? It talks in the big book about brotherly and harmonious action. I think that's in the big book. Could be the 12 and 12. So effectiveness, efficiency, harmony. To be effective in that way, to achieve that combination, I need to be calm, and I need not to be wasting emotional energy and time. And that's what a lot of this is about. I think for addicts and alcoholics, I had to learn to do things and to show up. A lot of the skill I've had to learn over the last few years, focusing more on the Anon side, is I've had to learn to stop doing things, so that the things that I do, I'm doing properly. So let's just finish off this chapter. It works, it really does. We alcoholics are undisciplined, so we let God discipline us in the simple way we have just outlined. It's an outline. You're going to fill in the detail from all sorts of different sources, as has been outlined above. This is the basic structure. Sometimes people say that everything you need is in the big book. And to a certain extent they're right, because the big book points to the other resources you need to use, to live by. I think the analogy is this: with the Step 11 materials in the big book, they're like when you rent a flat which is partly furnished. So it's got everything you need to live. There are 3 saucepans in the kitchen. There is a bed. There is some basic linen. But you're going to need some of your own stuff, and you're going to want to decorate it too. You can live in it as it is, but you're going to want your own things. And your own things are fine. Now, just as if you tried to live in a flat without a flat, just with your things, you're walking around with all of your belongings in a shopping trolley. You need the flat. You need the basic. You need the cooker. You need the bed. And it's like that with steps 10 and 11. The biggest danger, I think, with the spiritual path is not to have a rigorous structure to live inside to keep you safe from yourself. Someone once said to me, "You're a danger to yourself and others." And they were right. And this is the discipline is this. How does God discipline us? By me doing this. There is no extra way in which God disciplines me. By me following this, this is the discipline, and Mark Houston would call this the daily disciplines. So you get to flesh it out with other practices and traditions. You get to marry this with a religious tradition if you're following a religious tradition. But as far as the program is concerned, this is the core of step 11. But this is not all. There is action and more action. Faith without works is dead. The next chapter is entirely devoted to step 12. I had a little word with a couple of people last week, and I said, once we get to the end of step 11, shall we carry on afterwards? I think the idea was there might be a couple of people who are interested in carrying on into the rest of the book. So I'm just going to do that. I'm going to keep turning up. If you don't want to be here, that's totally fine. And I'll stop. Once people stop turning up, I'll stop doing this. But don't feel any obligation, of course. Does anyone have any questions? If there are no questions, then I'm going to unmute everyone. Let's close with the Serenity Prayer, if you care to join me. God, grant me the serenity to accept the things I cannot change, the courage to change the things I can, and the wisdom to know the difference. Thank you, and I'm going to post the audio in the usual place later on today. So I'll see you next week, everyone. Bye-bye.